18 years. Gary Sweeney, thanks for coming.
First, you don't mind, I'd like to take the old sweater off here and get a little bit better acquainted. My name is Gary Sweeney. I ran for Cincinnati City Council. We had the largest last place total in the last 18 years, if that says anything. We got about 1% of the vote, and the mayor of Cincinnati got about 9%. So it clearly shows that the people are wanting something different. Most of you, or hopefully most of you, are familiar with the Libertarian Party. If not, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. We were founded in 1972 by a group out in Colorado. What we stand for is what the country was originally founded on, that is individual liberties, this being one of them. I have a little definition here that was sent into the Wall Street Journal, and coincidentally came from the Internal Revenue Service of their definition of the Libertarian Party. It says the Libertarian Party is a political philosophy, the basic premise of which is that each individual should be free to do as he or she pleases, so long as he or she does not harm others. In the libertarian view, societies and governments infringe on individual liberties whenever they tax wealth, create penalties for victimless crimes, or otherwise attempt to control or regulate individual conduct which harms or benefits no one except the individual who engages in it. This is one of those things. The United States is supposedly engaged in a war on drugs, and what we really find out is a war on truth, along with a war on liberties. The Libertarian Party is opposed to both of these. A few of the interesting things, right today in the newspaper, this was an article in the Cincinnati newspaper. It says, "End insane war on all drugs by making them legal again." This was by a Cincinnati Libertarian, Paul Thiel. The one thing we have to be careful in is when the government engages in these kind of things is exactly what the little editorial cartoon on the bottom of this is. We have a police car with a bullseye on the side, and it says, news item, drug dealers have more and better and faster shooting guns than the police. And this is something I'd like to get into also. The government is using the war on drugs in an attempt to disarm the American people. And this is something that the people on the right, if you like to call them that, the gun owners, have a very difficult thing to deal with. I've been working with the gunners for over 2 years, and they understand the right to keep and bear arms, but they do not understand the right to be able to self-medicate. And this is something that we have to change in their mind. But what we're really talking about here is liberty. The liberty to do with your life what you want without harming anybody else. We have to look throughout history of what liberty can do to somebody. And like I said, this is an issue not just because it's drugs, but of liberty. We look out throughout history at the beginning of our country when the first Minutemen stood up and faced the British and traded shots. And you could say, well, these people, well, they were more self-motivated. They were interested in their own things. And you could say that's possible. And maybe a little bit later on in the war, we had a place called Valley Forge. And in Valley Forge, our Continental Army was wintered. And the principles of freedom and liberty is what sustained them. And this time in history, an army in the field is the most important thing that there is. For an army to survive is paramount. But what the United States Continental Army did at that time was a little bit different. Instead of retiring to their winter quarters and taking what they needed from the countryside, they believed that if they were fighting for something worth dying for and something worth living for, freedom, that the Patriots would sustain them. And they made extra sure that their troops did not go out and pillage from the countryside as other places will. So we have a group of people that are willing to fight and die for the principles of liberty. And you might say, well, that's okay. These guys were militiamen, a lot of these guys were army. We have to look a little farther. There's another group of people that fought for liberty and were slaughtered. This great American, if I can quote from a ROTC manual, in the 11 weeks he had moved his tribe of 1,600 miles, engaged 10 separate U.S. commands in 13 battles and skirmishes, in nearly every instance either defeating them or fought them to a standstill. General Sherman rightly termed the struggle of one of the most extraordinary Indian wars of which was ever recorded. The person I'm talking about is Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. Here's a group of people that were being oppressed by our United States government. One of the most remarkable military campaigns ever. Engaged more United States troops than any other unit before or since. And he gave up when he was only just miles short of the Canadian border, the grandmother land, and he gave up not because he was defeated and not because liberty wasn't worth continuing to fight for, but his soldiers and his warriors were dead. He gave up because of freedom, to give the kids and the children of his tribe the chance to live and obtain adulthood and fight for their freedoms. There's another view of an American congressman helping a group trying to fight for their independence, and which is something that's kind of strange today. It's understandable groups like Normal trying to fight for their own rights. But we have to look at all rights, all liberties are sacred, and we must fight for all of them. Another group, like I say, a United States congressman went to help a small group of people that were struggling for their independence. And together with Jim Bowie, Davy Crockett, they died at a place called the Alamo. And here's a place where to stand up for somebody else's right, when you know that you're going to face sure death. When anybody says, are we doing enough, we are not doing enough. These people have given their lives to the idea of freedom. And this is what the Libertarian Party is about. And this is what things like this is about. The idea is not just drug use or the availability of drug use or anything like that. It is liberty. Who controls your body? Do you or does the government? And who controls your actions? Is it you or is it the government? The thing we have to use is just that. The idea of the Declaration of Independence. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creators with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Not to build roads, governments are instituted to secure these rights. And that when any government becomes oppressive of these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government. And this is something that we're involved in right now. Anybody that would say, especially when we talk about marijuana, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, obviously this is a pursuit of happiness. Now you may say that people that are addicted to drugs, that are drug addicts, may have passed the point of pursuit, but the harmless endeavor of smoking a weed, cannabis, is considered a crime is insane. One of the best things we can do is use the people that are already out there to our advantage. People like George Shultz, who's come out recently in favor of drug legalization, Milton Friedman, and the list goes on. When you talk about drug legalization or re-legalization, as the Libertarian Party prefers it, you have to come across as not some far-out radical group. You have to use what tools are available. This is a report by Citizens Against Substance Abuse in Cincinnati. And it clearly states that the alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana are the three most popular drugs of teens. Tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana are the first drugs in that order. So when somebody comes up and tries to say that, marijuana is a stepping stone type drug, clearly there is enough evidence out there that this isn't so. Actually, it's caffeine, tobacco, alcohol, and then marijuana. If marijuana was a stepping stone drug, then what's the first three? We have to keep reinforcing to people that the drugs that are out there, the drug problems that we have, the largest drug problem, and here again, CASA and other drug fighting agencies will tell you that alcohol is the most detrimental drug, the biggest problem they have. Cigarettes and alcohol together kill over 500,000 people. But the Food and Drug Administration has declared that marijuana is the safest therapeutically active substance known to man, and no one has ever died from it. Yet it is still illegal. There's a couple studies out. This one here by, who is this one? Ronald Siegel. It's a nice book. It's called The Study to Get High is Basic. And he is a pharmacologist, and he has done a lot of studies with animals, and he's found out that throughout the animal kingdom, there is a drive in the mammal brain to alter consciousness. This is a very normal thing that happens. Anybody that's seen little children on playgrounds that spin around and around on merry-go-rounds and fall down, it's because of this. Take my time here. You have to excuse, I'm a little disoriented. We just walked in the door here from the long drive. Getting back to what the government is doing is kind of a two-prong attack. At the time that we're subsidizing tobacco and killing hundreds of thousands of people, there's a war against the citizens because there's the idea is perpetuated that so-called assault rifles, and if you take that inflammatory adjective off the front, we're talking about rifles, are the choice of weapons for the drug dealers, and this is something that's not true again. And when we talk about, especially when you come to somebody, to the typical right, with an idea that drugs should be legalized, they have a very difficult time. So you have to find something that they can relate to, and especially the gun issue, and especially in rural areas and somewhat in the urban areas, the gun issue is something that is very important. In Cincinnati, they've passed a law that you have to register all semi-automatic guns. Only 16 weapons have been registered. 4 people registered out of a city of 350,000. What we have to do is show people like this, and the gun groups understand that the media is out there and lying about these weapons. That an AK-47 type weapon is no more dangerous, and in many cases less dangerous than most shotguns. They understand what the government is doing and how they're lying. So what you have to do is relate to them. One of the best ways to do this is that you find somebody that's especially into Second Amendment rights, but usually does not believe that drugs should be legalized because of the drug crime that goes along with it. You have to make them understand that the crime is the result of the drug laws, not the drugs. Anybody that's engaged in criminal activities, violent criminal activities, this should not be tolerated in a civilized society. And what you have to tell them is, for guns, for instance, is you tell them, you substitute the word drugs for guns and figure out why drugs should be illegal, and you just shot yourself in the foot. And this baffles them because they believe they should have the right to own an AK-47, one of the guns that I myself own. But drugs is something that is perpetuated in the media as such an evil type of thing that most people do not realize that drugs were legal at one time. Reggie Williams, who's a councilman, also a Bengal, Cincinnati Bengal player. We were at a taping one night on a public access channel, and at the end, I made a comment just like about the FDA declaring marijuana the safest therapeutically active substance. And he turned to me and said, "You don't believe in drug legalization, do you?" And I said, "Well, I do believe in drug re-legalization." And I asked him, I said, "You're familiar with the drug problem or this whole thing, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, he's fairly familiar." So I asked him, "How long have drugs been illegal?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, governments have always controlled drugs." I said, "Wrong." And I explained to him that before the Harrison Act, the first attempt to try to control the opiates, that there were no federal laws against drugs. That Coca-Cola was sold in 6- and 8-ounce bottles, not because people weren't thirsty, that because it contained cocaine, and it was considered a soft drink, because as opposed to the hard drinks, and that the syrup was dispensed in pharmacies because of the drug factor in it. And I asked him if he knew when marijuana was declared illegal, and he balked at answering this question, and I explained to him that it went into effect in about 1937. Then I proceeded to produce the Harvard medical study on marijuana and shot down everything that he could come up with. After that meeting, he had kind of stayed away from me at most of the other council things. The media is not for this. In Cincinnati, running as a libertarian, somebody that believes that the ownership of firearms and the re-legalization of marijuana, you would think would make the news. The media is against it because it sells newspapers. The thing that we have to do, and what each person can do, and it shouldn't take hardly any effort on your part, is write letters. Letters are very important. They make the newspapers. If you think that giving money to NORML and these kind of groups is good, but the personal involvement changes more people. The other thing is that people, unfortunately, will look at you and make character judgments on yourself. 4 years ago, I had hair down to here and I played in a hard rock band, and most people really wouldn't have listened to my comments. In the city council campaign, I brought up the issue of drugs at every opportunity, and not one person had thought that we were off base. Not one person had thought that we were some kind of kooks. The majority of the people really are behind this. They realize that the cost of fighting drugs, the $9 billion that is being spent now, which is really only $2 billion more than they already had allocated for that, is going to a waste. When you see articles out of the, I'll find it here somewhere, out of the Law Journal magazines that declare that there is no victory in sight, at 25% of the top prosecutors believe that marijuana should be decriminalized. These are the kind of facts that you have to present in front of people. The facts will weigh out. The problem is the media, like I said, is not going to be on your side. Going through your congressman helps, but not much. These guys are looking for voters, so what you have to do is get politically involved. Like I said, the Libertarian Party, we got 5,069 votes in a campaign in which we spent just a little over $2,000. The mayor of Cincinnati spent $120,000 and got slightly over $50,000. If we want to make changes, we can try to change from within the system, or we can try to change revolutionary. We have that right to alter or abolish the government. I would prefer to try to alter it, because abolishing it is rather messy and rather loud. This is what I'm talking about right here. National Law Journal. Prosecutors admit no victory in sight. The news media is continually perpetuating the drug war because it sells newspapers. It looks good. We've got how many police shows that are on the air now showing people busting in and busting in on drug dealers. What we have to explain to them is the same thing that happened during Prohibition. Most people and most of our parents and our older relatives are quite familiar with this. In Cincinnati, most of the older people actually participated in Prohibition. My grandfather helped make bathtub gin. We have to explain to them that the same way, especially again on the gunners, before 1930, in the 1920s, fully automatic weapons were totally legal. There were no restrictions. You could walk into a store, put down your money, and buy them, just like you could walk into the store previous to that in the 1914s and buy any drug you wanted. You could order cocaine through the Sears and Roebuck magazine. A lot of people do not know their own heritage. Most people do not understand the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, and these are our two biggest things. People say your ideas are idealistic. Well, if an idea isn't worth fighting for, then what's reality? Because everything is based on an idea, based on a fundamental principle. So our biggest things that we can work with is just that. Educate the people that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are some people that will say that it is necessary to curtail our rights. Benjamin Franklin told us over 200 years ago that there are people that would be willing to trade their liberties for securities, but it's a bad deal. You'll wind up with neither. These are the kind of things we have to keep drumming into people's heads. They are very afraid that if drugs are legalized, that people will be going out and running around doing drugs. So we have to explain to them that when a farm boy in Illinois, Iowa, is found with a straw up his nose snorting cocaine, that the drugs is pretty much permeated every level of society. We also have to look at what the news medias are doing. It's a very racist thing they're doing. You look at it, 99% of the people that's shown in newscasts are blacks, are inner city. When the majority of drugs, $150 billion worth of illegal drugs are being consumed in the United States, also along with $1 billion of legal drugs, the majority of people are upper class, affluent people that can afford the drugs. We look at Michael Dukakis' wife, who has admittedly been addicted to speed for between 17 and 26 years. That then became an alcoholic and is now in the hospital for drinking rubbing alcohol. This is a tragedy, but it is a health crisis. It is not a criminal activity. We have to press upon the people that the actual facts, most people don't even realize, I mean, they know that cigarettes kill, but there's a continual, especially on marijuana, a continual blacklist, the continual lies that are put out about marijuana. The idea that Mr. Young of the Food and Drug Administration could make the declaration that he had made, and nobody even realizing this, is a real disservice to the news media. This is something that we have to continue to get out. Use the sources that are available to your own benefit. Any drug, like I said, any drug fighting agency will have lists available and show you that alcoholism is by far a higher social cost than almost any of the illegal drugs. 20 years ago, the big thing, or 15 years ago, the big thing was heroin. And the biggest thing for heroin addicts, for instance, is not that the drug is that detrimental, is that the laws that go along with it. That you could, not that it is a good thing to do, but there are people that have been addicted to opiums and the heroins and can live productive lives if the cost of the drug is not prohibitive. The way we deal with drugs in our society is insane. If somebody is caught smoking a cigarette, nothing happens to them. Tax money is subsidized for the production of tobacco. If a kid is caught smoking a marijuana joint, what happens to him? He gets a criminal record. He goes to jail. In some places, he may go to prison, especially if he happened to sell some of this. We're not helping these people. They're giving them a criminal record. It's not easy for these people then to get a job when they come back out. What we have to relate to people is get to where their money is. Because drugs cost so much, because of the laws that are surrounding it, what happens is it's like a mini inflation. The people who deal drugs have more money available to buy cars and houses and food, and what it does is it makes everything else for the rest of us go up. We have to look at it the best way to deal with drugs. You have to explain to them that there is no utopia. People will look at drugs and you try to think that people who believe in legalizing drugs do not care about people that do the drugs. This is something we have to try to change, that although we believe that drug abuse should be counseled against, but the best thing is education. One of the points I brought up during my campaign is, since I was the youngest candidate for Cincinnati City Council, I clearly remember the reefer mania stuff that went on. When I was in junior high, a police officer came into class, dumped a bag of marijuana out, lit it so everybody could smell it. A few of the kids that knew what it was got first up in line, and they got back again for the second and third rounds. And then they showed a little movie about talking hot dogs, and if you smoked one joint, you would go out and chop your mother up with a hatchet and stuff. And although it didn't really frighten anybody, myself included, I didn't know what it was. I had tried cigarettes once, and it made me kind of sick. So I had really no interest in it at that time. But what it does is it sets up the idea that the government is lying. Later in school, when I was in high school, I had an acquaintance come up to me who was doing LSD and was having a rather bad time of it. I don't really understand the whole terminology of bad trips. He was saying the walls were breathing and everything was going on, and he's saying he's having a bad trip. And I said, well, you took LSD. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. I think you got your money's worth. But his whole thing was he wasn't prepared for that because he didn't believe that would happen. He didn't think that this was possible because he had smoked marijuana for a couple years, and that the government continually lied on that. And every time he went to a counselor to try to talk about it, they'd give him the same song and dance. What we have to challenge them on is the groups that are trying to help fight drug abuse. Most of their pamphlets on marijuana just state their own propaganda. When you try to get down and find out where are your facts that it causes birth defects, or it causes brain damage, or it causes a million other different things, they produce their own propaganda to stand for facts. This is something that has to change, and it's something we have to call them on. And it's real simple. Like I said, writing letters, making phone calls. It's not too much. Donating money or time to people that are going to fight this in the political arena. It is very difficult at this time for people to stand up and say, I believe in relegalizing drugs. You know, it's one thing on a college campus where you're kind of sheltered. It's another thing when you have to face, a large city with the police and the administration that doesn't really go along with this. The libertarians are very fortunate that, well, I don't know if they're very fortunate. Some people say it takes a lot of brains or no brains and a lot of guts to stand up for this kind of a thing. But the Libertarian Party is the only group out here that is consistently fighting this kind of propaganda. We do need your help. But what we need more than anything is for people to spread the word. Groups like this do a very good service to the community. What we have to do is change the social conscience to show that the people that are actually doing the drugs are not the people that are really causing the crime. That because of the drugs being illegal, that the criminal element is being drawn into it. And because the criminal element is being drawn into it, that innocent people that would normally not bother the rest of society are being drawn into contact with the criminal element. In Washington, D.C., where $14 million has been spent in the last 6 months to try to eradicate or at least get a control on the violence and drugs that are ravaging the city, they are about 105 deaths ahead of where they were last year. They have made massive cocaine seizures, but there is no dent on the demand or the price of the drugs. These are the things that we have to continue to hammer in. The time, I feel, is coming close where this issue will be brought up, because the media, we can use it against them. The media wants to keep the drug issue in the papers and on television because it sells advertisement, so we can use it for our advantage. Every time that you see something that is blatant against the drugs, every one of you should write a letter. They'll print one or two, maybe more, and explain that the reason that you have these kind of crimes is because of the drug law. We have to look to the examples of places like Washington, D.C., where drugs are illegal and guns are illegal. Yet, when you drive 3 blocks north of the Capitol, there are people standing in front of crack houses with submachine guns. It is not going to solve the problem. If drugs were legal, there would be no market, there would be no incentive to get younger kids involved in drugs. I came from the west side of Cincinnati. Until I was in my last year at junior high, I had never even seen marijuana. When we were in high school, most of the harder drugs were still non-existent. Now, in the elementary schools, we start seeing not only marijuana, but a lot of coke and crack getting into the younger kids. The best way to protect our children is to make it legal for adults to consume the drug that they want. We also have to explain to people that places like Mexico have no prescription law, but they don't have a country full of drug addicts. You don't see the Mexicans lining up at the pharmacia to get Percodans or Lacodine. They don't do it. Another thing it does is it lowers the health issue. When people are talking about the rising cost of Medicare, one of the biggest reasons that is that if you have an allergy, if you have an ailment, you have to go to the doctor, pay money to him, then go to a pharmacy and pay him for that drug. The way we have regulated health care in the United States is causing it to go up. People can't be a midwife, for instance, and prescribe certain drugs, which is really bad, because what happens is a lot of times people who don't have the money and don't understand the system will not go and seek health care. One of the greatest ways to reduce health costs is to lower the amount of people that are getting sick. Back to cigarettes again. The highest social cost that we have is from our society smoking cigarettes. I want to take a break here for a half second because I'm getting kind of close. Anybody have any questions, comments, observations? How many people before you came here have ever heard of the Libertarian Party? Ah, good. Besides the Libertarians in the back who came here from Columbus. There is some material on the table back there about the Libertarian Party, and I encourage you to find out more about it. When we talk about left or we talk about right, it really isn't saying anything about where the person is going to stand. Libertarians stand that if the government is involving itself in somebody's liberties where it doesn't affect anybody but those people involved in it, that the government should stay out. We have seen Democrats and Republicans float both ways. It has been well said and repeated many times that there's not a dime's worth of difference between the Democrats and Republicans. And what happens many times is a lot of people that consider themselves on the left on social issues look at it as that the large companies, the right, the greedy capitalists and the conservatives are what's causing the country. We have homeless because of the greedy people that buy up land and land speculate. But when we look at what's causing it, we find out the government is subsidizing it. We find out on the ecology end, since this is being sponsored by the Ohio Ecology Club, that in Alaska, for instance, the government subsidizes all logging roads. They subsidize to the tune of 98% the money that is earned by these loggers. The government is destroying our land. That's something that would never happen in a normal free market society. On the other side, people that consider themselves from the right or conservative looks at the drug issue as the violence end. All they see is drug dealers running around with machine guns. This myth that's been perpetuated by the news media. But they don't understand that in many cases it is exactly the drug laws that cause these crimes. That people have a right to medicate themselves. That it is something that is natural. It is something that's gone on since the beginning of time. It is something that will go on to the end of time. What we must do is look for safe alternatives. By simply re-legalizing marijuana, I believe that we could cut a lot of money and a lot of the crime out of illegal drug use. If it's just as illegal for me to try to find marijuana, and usually just as hard to find marijuana as it is to crack, usually you're going to spend the money that gives you the most bang for your buck. This is something that we have to try to reiterate to people over and over again, that the greatest way that we can take the first step is to make marijuana legal. In Alaska, marijuana is legal if you grow it or if you have possession for self-use. And Alaska didn't exactly deteriorate into chaos. The Netherlands is another great place where you have almost unbelievable social issues coming up right next to each other. Major banking along with open drug use and prostitution, but yet their crime rate is extremely low. So what we have to do in summing up here is that each of us can do more than just come to these kind of things. These are great. What we have to do, though, is get involved. When you talk to people, make sure that they understand the facts, that the laws are causing the crime, not the drugs, that the government is perpetuating this crime against the citizens. I think I'll wrap it up here. I don't know if these guys are about ready or not, but like I said, I would hope you would stop by the Libertarians table and pick up some information. We have a toll-free number, which we'd like to also start as a young Libertarians at Ohio State. We have one started in Miami, Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. We'd also like to start one here. The Ohio Libertarians, and especially the Cincinnati Libertarians, are very fortunate, Libertarians being the kind of independent people that they are, that we pride ourselves that we got a college group going without national funds from our party. So we'd like to get a Libertarian group here. We have some cards in the back. It's a 10-question quiz called the World's Smallest Political Quiz. We'd encourage you to stop by and pick them up and take the quiz for yourself and find out exactly where you do stand politically. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you. Hello. Right now, I think we're basically close to being in tune here. I know we're going to start off with one of my songs real quick. It's a remake of a Donovan tune, and then the band's going to kick in here on the next tune. It's especially for all of us who feel we have a reason to be here today. Hope that sound man's awake over there. Yellow is the color of our Colombian gold in the morning as it flies in the morning as it flies all across our sunny skies. And green is the color of our Sensimilia in the morning as it dries in the morning as it dries. That's the time, that's the time, that's the time, that's the time I first get high. And blue is the color of our sheriff's boys as they trespass across our fields, looking for our plentiful yield. They got big guns, real big guns. They're out looking for fun and to steal our weed or our land or our vehicles or our houses or whatever else they can get their This verse is for Nancy. Need I say who? But drugs are a thing I rarely use when I'm thinking about current world situations, or when I'm dealing with my own bizarre frustrations. But drugs are fun, drugs are fun, drugs are the one, yeah, the one. Drugs are good food. Yellow is is the color of our Colombian gold in the morning as it flies. In the morning as it flies. That's the time all across our sunny skies. Where's our drummer?
Little morning music.
This is a hitchhiking song. I don't know how many of you have been out there in the cold trying to catch a ride, and you find out just where America's really at. It's kind of sad. I'm just a traveling down this highway, wondering if I'll ever get home. I'm just a traveling down this highway. Lord, I feel so all alone, and I don't think that things could get much more worse. I got an imaginary mama, but she ain't got nothing in her purse. Not a penny. I'm just a traveling down this highway. My pack is getting heavy, I'm tempted just to leave it behind. I'm just a traveling down this highway. My pack is getting heavy, I'm tempted just to leave it behind. And I don't think the people could be much more kinder. They're all smiling and all waving and all laughing as they leave me behind. I wipe the tears from mine eyes as I pick up a rock. I cannot help it if I give that laughing candy driver A-shock. Time for a new back window, motherfucker. And I really don't mean to instill any more paranoia in the people than they already feel. And there's a lot of it. I'm just a traveling down this highway, wanting to see what you're gonna do. I'm just a traveling down this highway, waiting to see what you're gonna do. Cause my thumb and my nose and my toes are froze. I find it hard to believe that you're really that cool. Are you now? I don't believe you. I'm just a traveling down this highway. Oh, Lord God, I need a ride. I need a ride. I need a ride. I need a ride, need a ride. I need a ride, need a ride. I need a ride, need a ride. Need a ride, need a ride. I need a ride, need a ride. I'm just a traveling down this highway, waiting to see what you're gonna heart, what you're gonna do.
Is there any are there any drummers in the audience?
gonna do another one of ours. Somebody's got a voice I could borrow, man. I could really use it. I'm just sitting on a log. Oh, oh, oh. I'm just sitting on a log. Down in this bog. Oh, oh. They gave me one too many things to do. Nobody ever comes to fill up my shoe. And I'm just gonna sit here on this log until I'm through. Be no wrestler or a money-hungry Greek. I ain't gonna be a nigga no more. I'm just another freak. Uh-oh. And I ain't gonna take no shit from you. I don't care if your face turns blue. I'm just gonna sit here on this log until I'm through. Until I'm through. Oh, oh, oh. Watch the ducks here on my log. They don't need to make no bucks. I think I'm learning from this log. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I can't think of a thing I wanna do except pound out maybe a song or two. Playing for the spiders, a creepy crawling on my log until I'm through. Until I'm through. Oh. what you will. I ain't all gonna listen. I see you stumbling up that hill. You don't know what you're missing. No way. And I can hear your mama calling. I can see your social and falling. It's obvious. It's time you did some logging. Oh, and I can tell you don't like the way I get high or the crazy kind of look in my eyes. That may be too bad, but there is one thing that you can do. Go sit on a log until you're through. Go sit on a log until you're through. I'm just sitting on a log. Oh, whoa. I'm just sitting on a log. Down in this bog. No, 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 no. And there are things to do. Nobody ever comes to fill up my shoe, and I'm just gonna sit here on this log until I'm through. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Until I'm through. Yeah, 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 yeah. Thank you. lovers. He wanted to give her everything. Flowers, presents, already. He saw a sign for a stock car race. $1,000 prize in red. He couldn't get more off. So tell the Lord I love her. Tell the Lord I need her. Tell the Lord I need her. I've something to do that cannot He drove his car to the racing ground. He was the youngest driver there. The crowd roared as they stole the race. But the driver drove and he never. No one knows how it happened that day.
book since 1973 on marijuana. That the name marijuana came to us from William Randolph Hearst decided that we wouldn't outlaw hemp, which was the #1 paper product that could produce on Earth if trees weren't being used. And he had a lot of trees. He owned the whole West Coast. Any of you who've ever been from San Simeon north to Big Sur knows how big a tract of land he owned. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres of the prime timberland to be cut down for making trees on the West Coast. That's how cheap it was, and that's what he thought it was. He owned it. He could do what he wanted with it. So he used the Mexican Sonoran name marijuana, and all of you have been stuck with that name, and I've been stuck with that name, meaning the flower of the hemp plant. And all the while they outlawed it, they never told any one of us it was the hemp plant. And because of that, hundreds of thousands of us have been in prison, have had our properties taken away for a plant that our legislators thought they were outlawing with some Mexican devilweed, was really the same plant that grew in their backyard, that their family had been making their clothes and diapers out of, had been using safely as a medicine called cannabis for almost 100 years as one of America's favorite medicines. They had no idea that the same thing William Randolph Hearst was talking about, that marijuana was the same plant that we called cannabis. It's a really strange thing when you have 15% of all the people in the United States read your paper every morning. I guess you can make up your own language for them. And because of that, millions of lives have been totally disrupted in the most unjust thing that ever happened. We found out that you can make virtually everything, that our ancestors made everything, as you've probably been told by the Ohio Normal, that all our clothing, our drapes, our books, our Bibles, the Declaration of Independence, the first and second draft, were written on marijuana. They were the ones that were approved, by the way, on July 2nd and released to the people on July 4th. The one you see signed, I saw it in the back of the room earlier, with John Hancock's signature, was not even ordered till July 19th or signed till August 2nd, and it was on animal skin, parchment. But your original documents, like all documents, were made on rag paper. And rags were your discarded sails, ropes, diapers, never thrown away. They just recycled into paper in a very natural way. Hemp grew on everybody's land by law until about 1800. You had to grow it because we needed the clothing and the cordage. This area of the country produced most of America's baleage for cotton until about 1860. They had to bale all that cotton they sent all over the world. They baled it with hemp from Kentucky and Indiana. And in the Kentucky area, I imagine they must have grown a lot of hemp in this area. I'm told they grow a lot of good hemp here right now. And in fact, I tried some of that hemp that they had here. This jacket that I wear, and I'd like to show it off, is because it's made out of marijuana. Or it's made out of the stalk of the plant. And for something like this, I want any one of you to feel free to come up and wear it or put it on. This was what our diapers and our clothing and our long johns were made from. And it's softer than cotton, it's warmer than cotton, it's 26 times longer lasting than cotton, it's 4 times more water absorbent so our kids can sleep all nights without changing the diapers. It's the softest, nicest thing you ever had next to your body, and it's 100% illegal. Now, I mean, you're in a great college right now, funded by the state of Ohio. I saw and spoke to some Ohio senators the other day who had never any other idea that maybe hemp had been used for rope, had no idea that the paper in this country had been made from it, and the government had figured out that once there was a way to decorticate and hemp, harvest hemp, that there no more paper would ever be made from trees. Now, when you read this in the 1916 USDA reports and the 1938 February Popular Mechanics saying that all your paper is going to be made out of cannabis, and then you've cut down the trees. Let me tell you what kind of a thing it was to outlaw hemp that year. The average age of a tree in America 50 years ago was 200 years old. Today it's 9 years old. That's a big difference. That's a pretty serious difference. That means your planet can't breathe. In fact, one of the reasons I hope the Ecology Club sponsored the marijuana movement, which I think is a great marriage, is because hemp, strangely, is probably the only way you can save your planet. I just wanted to find out some reason to sell marijuana to people so I could get to legally get high and not spend my life being an outlaw. But along the way, I found out that the same product that they outlawed was the only product that they could save the world with, and nobody else would believe you. You get stuck with taking that kind of information about and telling the emperor that he wears no clothes, that there is no reason to outlaw the #1 fiber, cheapest fiber now that we can harvest it mechanically on Earth, as well as the best fiber, the best and cheapest form of paper for every grade of paper, from toilet to newsprint to corrugated box. You do 1/7 the damage to the environment. You never have to cut down another tree. You have an annual biomass that grows every year, and that whatever goes out in carbon dioxide, if you use it for fuel, next year when you grow it, it cycles it so that it will just keep glowing like a planet in balance. I went, and I'll probably tell this story a little bit in more detail later tonight, but I went to the head of the man to reverse the greenhouse effect for the United States. His name is Steve Rawlings, and he was just put in charge last year to be the man to reverse the greenhouse effect for the United States Department of Agriculture, the highest ranking officer in the U.S. Department of Agriculture for this type of job. And I said to him, I was from Greenpeace, and I said to him, how would you figure out a way to reverse the greenhouse effect if you could do anything you wanted? And he said, no more fossil fuels would be burnt, and you wouldn't cut down any more trees. And I said, well, why don't you do that? And he said, well, you can't because of the economy. I said, what if there was a plant that could grow, that could run all of your fuel, all of your homes for cars, industry? He said, well, if there was such a plant, the world would be saved. I said, well, it'd make all your paper. It made all of our paint. And I went on and on and on, delineated all the things that hemp could do without naming. He said, well, what is it? And I said, hemp. He said, wow, you know, I think you're right. I said, you know, that's a really interesting idea. I never thought about it. I think you're right. He said, of course, you can't do it. Now, this is the man that's in charge of all of Americans reversing the greenhouse effect. And he's one decent guy. I don't think he's a bad guy. Don't get me wrong. He said, well, he was being very matter-of-factly. He said, I don't think you can do it, but it's a wonderful idea. And I said, why can't you do it? And he said, well, Mr. Harrer, are you aware that hemp is marijuana? I said, yeah, I've been writing about it for 17 years. I'm real aware that hemp is marijuana. He said, well, you know it's illegal, don't you? I said, yeah. Well, he said, well, you can't use it. I said, even to save the earth? Even if it's the only plant you can save the earth with? He said, of course not. It's illegal. You can't use it. This man pretty much in general agreed with me that hemp was the one candidate we had to save the planet naturally, if there was a candidate, and then told me we couldn't use it because it was illegal. Now, personally, I would think you should be as outraged as I am every moment of your life until this type of mentality gets out of there, because we're dead guys, we're lemmings, and we're just sitting here waiting for it to happen. Or you're out there changing it and stopping this type of bureaucratic, ignoramus horseshit from ever stepping on our minds and intellect again, ever, even for a second. I said to him, Mr. Rawlings, I mean, here's a way to make all of your paper, all of the clothing, actually, if you wanted to, no more fossil fuels, not one more drop. You can grow it in Nebraska, and you don't even have to use the best farmlands. You could create a natural guard instead of a national guard, and told him all sorts of unique ways we could handle this problem. He said, I don't disagree with you, but you can't use it because it's illegal. I said, suggest it to the Secretary of Agriculture that some crazy guy told you about a way that you think deserves investigation. He said, if I suggested that, I'd be out of here in a day, in a moment. I said, call it up on your electronic searches from your libraries. He says, I can't. I said, I did. I'm a citizen. I went out there. He said, that's the difference. You're a citizen, Mr. Harry. You can go into the USDA library and call up marijuana or hemp information, but as the highest ranking officer of the government, he told me that he couldn't because he'd be investigated for calling up hemp and marijuana information. This is what's running your government. You're here at Ohio U, which is a great state university, and you don't have 4 years to matriculate through this type of bureaucratic craziness, because he was replaced with a guy that's even crazier about 3 months ago. There's a guy named Dr. Gary Evans. He's USDA in charge of reversing the global warming trend. This is the Ecology Club, and I tell you, that's a pretty serious thing. I've seen computer models that suggest the planet can flip on its axis if it melts enough. That's pretty frightening. I mean, imagine it's happened before in history without greenhouse gases. But I said to Dr. Gary Evans, and he's the highest ranking officer of the United States government for the USDA in agriculture and science. That's the #1 ranking officer in our government. And he told me, when I told him I was from Greenpeace and there was a way to reverse the greenhouse effect, and asked him what he would suggest first, and then told him what we had, he said, what plant are you talking about? And I said, hemp. He says, yeah, I thought you were talking about hemp. He says, sure, yeah, marijuana and hemp would do it, but you're not going to get it because a lot of people have a lot of hard feelings about hemp. He said, Mr. Harris, if you really want to save this planet, you would make a marijuana that didn't get you high and do all the other things that you've said you wanted to do, and then you could use it. But as long as it has the ability to get you high, we're not going to let you use it. This is the other man in charge. See, one was reversing the greenhouse effect, and the other guy in charge of reversing the global warming trend. This is what you have in charge of your government this minute as I speak. Or your own intellect and your own reasoning to get up and say, hey, I'm not a lemming. I want to have children and great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I want to play under the stars and in fresh air, and I am never going to put up. And maybe we make a date after the year 2000 or whatever, that we make a date that we never put up another drop of unanswered carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere. If this planet's going to flip on its axis, it's not going to be with my help. You're the only ones that can take responsibility to standing up to your friends and telling them intelligence, even saying, oh, you just want to smoke pot. Yeah, I want to smoke pot. It happens to be that there's studies so far, their own studies, and they weren't looking for this information. It was an anomaly that kept coming up in 10,000s of their studies, that you lived a little bit longer if you smoked pot than if you didn't do any drugs at all. And you lived 8 to 24 years longer than regular alcohol and tobacco users. And then you have, so now you have an ecology reason, you have a health reason. Let's give you the brain reasons. We now know that the brain will not destruct in any way, shape, or form under hemp. But on television, you'll see these are the brain waves of a 14-year-old before he smokes marijuana. These are the brain waves after. The brain waves after, as 2 UCLA psychiatrists pointed out to ABC TV about 2 weeks ago, are that of somebody that was actually comatose, and that the government or whoever put that ad together had the beta waves of a normal 14-year-old, which, by the way, beta waves translate as static or fight or flight. And then they showed the comatose waves of a person that was actually comatose, not a person on marijuana, as the other waves. These are the brain waves before you smoke marijuana. These are the brain waves after, which was a total hype. Those weren't the brain waves of a person after. When you smoke marijuana, your brain waves after are called alpha waves. They're the highest waves your mind will ever achieve in your life. You'll spend 30 years in meditation to get a moment at alpha that you can get with a puff of a joint. You'll be in a monastery praying for whatever and to whomever, for years to get a second there. I had a kid come up to me, I think at Notre Dame or Purdue a few weeks ago, and he said, you know, I've been working to get to that level, and all you guys do is smoke one joint and you're there. I think you're just taking a cheap way out. I said, listen to this. You can't find a pothead who's got an ulcer. All my parents' friends had ulcers and thought they were going to die from ulcers. My friends, I don't have one friend that's got an ulcer today. They all smoke pot. That's enough reason. You don't have to be a lemming both on the ecology. There's no way to save your planet except to use natural things. And it happens to be that the thing that our intelligent politicians, without checking, outlawed was the #1 vegetable to the #1 40th vegetable on your planet and mine, marijuana, hemp. And they better give it back because the planet's doomed, and you better fight for it to get back. You don't even have to like marijuana. You don't even have to be for pot. You don't have to be Jewish to let other people eat bagels and rye bread, you know? All you have to do is be fair. If other people think they're going to live longer, even if they were going to live shorter, it's their business. But if you poison your planet, driving a car on fossil fuel that could be run out of any type of living biomass, especially an annual one, then you're poisoning the planet. When your government doesn't even give you a choice to do that, put an end to that government by taking up upon yourselves the right to vote, the right to persuade other people to vote and why to vote, and don't worry about people putting you down or being popular for a week or two. In the long run, if this is the truth, you're going to be the best thing that happened on your block and the best thing that ever happened to our planet, because this is the nucleus of how the planet's going to be free again, free to breathe air and free to get high without having to ask the government if I can do it on nicotine or alcohol. Thanks.
We have a movie in room 203, and we.
Oh, hello. Hello.
My observation was that probably the people sitting at that table, the two of us that are really experts, are the two board members that are going to be leaving, and the school is far from being finished. I think that the new board might want to consider asking Mr. Kuhn, Mr. Whaley, maybe if they would be consultants, a community kind of resource. I think that they're interested in volunteering. Obviously, if you're a board member, you're not asking for money. So I guess I see them as very important people, and they've been involved in it for a long time, and just sort of put them on the path. I think they would be a little bit more out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Balfour, was it? Am I pronouncing it correctly, John? Okay.
Yes, I'd like to address an article that's in the Messenger on the 28th of November in reference to the possible the allocation of funds to hire 6 assistant track coaches at middle school level. I've been involved in interscholastic athletics at a local, national, and international level for almost 30 years. And I'm probably one of the biggest proponents of athletics in the overall education of the high school level student. However, I am concerned in a time of, let's say, creative aspects of budgetary funds, that the money can be better spent, particularly when elementary school students and their teachers don't have enough money for field trips and basic supplies and paper and things like this. The other concern I have is that here we're supposed to be educating and providing an overall education for the total student, and yet most of the elementary students that I've been in contact with only have one period of physical education per week, and yet this is far from not to take away from the middle school program in terms of developing the track and field curricular, extracurricular activity, because I think it's very important. But I think there can be some more creative types of approaches to provide coaching at much less expense and possibly even no expense. There's some volunteer activity from the university environment, education classes, and things like this. I would encourage the board to take into account, again, not only the creative activities of trying to move monies around, and I understand and appreciate the situation, but I think it's important that they look at all aspects of the budget, not just things that are allocating certain programs that may need to have monies moved from one place to the other.
Thank you. As a quick explanation, as someone who sits and chairs the curriculum committee, which also includes athletics, we had an extensive discussion on that, in partial answer at least, in discussing this with the athletic director, Mike Meek. He was allocated a certain number of dollars to be utilized during the course of the year, and by moving positions around within his program, he is still within budget and is now able to create, we think, in a very creative way, a middle school program that heretofore had not existed. We had no spring program of any kind at the middle school, and this was one way of bringing some sort of co-curricular recreational program to the middle school without additional cost to his budget. Admittedly, it's cost to the program, but it was incorporated into the initial budget. We asked Mike to be creative in that way. He's also been very successful in identifying some volunteers. Our hope is, like yours, that we'll continue to attract volunteers, particularly from the sports ad program at the university, which has been very successful over the years. So I think, again, in our conversation with the athletic director, we were satisfied as a committee in our discussion that what Mike has been able to do with his existing budget is, in fact, to create a program that did not exist to meet the needs after school of a group of youngsters who would otherwise be totally unoccupied. So that's in partial answer to what you're saying, although admittedly I think we agree with you in terms of what you're saying.
President Rudy, could I just say one thing too? Now, Mike is here. I don't know if he'd like to at least say something, but one of the things we're putting back on the agenda that's not on there in the motion is some supplementals for the boys and girls recreation programs in the elementary. So, you know, that's not shown on your agenda yet, but we are addressing that. But, you know, I think the fact that they are not new, I think that was a misunderstanding, that these are not new assistant coaching positions.
I mean, I realize that.
Okay, I don't know.
Again, this is an unfortunate situation.
Mr. Meek, did you want to comment on that as our athletic director?
Yes, President. We, in the past, we had two head coaches, and I'm recommending one head coach staying there.
Is it not true also, Mr. Meek, that you have eliminated some other positions, such as, I think, for example, assistant gymnastics coach, perhaps? Assistant wrestling coach. So within the parameters of your budget, you have decided to change priorities. In this way, you're really involving more students, as President Rudy indicated, providing more opportunities for co-curricular activities. We also have the new $130,000 track, which we got on the cheap, that we're going to make better use of, I think, as a consequence.
Just as a correction to the technical language, we didn't eliminate positions, we chose not to fill them.
Thank you.
Please.
Correct.
It's a big difference.
Sensitive around this time of the year.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, based on the list that I have submitted to me, those are all the names that I have of people who wanted to address the board. Is that correct? Yes.
I was talking to Roger about this issue, and I have the recent paper here, but I want to ask if we have it stated here that we recommend the use of excess sorry funds to complete asbestos removal at the Athens Middle School. This doesn't make any mention of a gymnasium. Now, that's been the public issue, but I want to go on record as saying what is going to be done precisely in the gymnasium. Is it going to be just the ceiling, asbestos? Is it going to be the stuff that covers the water pipes, deals with the plumbing facilities? And what does this $5,000 amount to? I mean, how is that broke? Does this include all of the gymnasium or just part of it?
Removing the asbestos on the pipe. It includes the grill and noise locker rooms. It includes the janitor's room and the coaches and teachers, gym teachers. And you know where the piping is covered with insulation.
So it is everything above the floor to the ceiling and everything below the floor?
Everything that's identified as asbestos.
Everything that's identified as asbestos?
Most of it through installation of the pipe.
Right.
I don't believe be anything, Larry, is there anything else that was in there identified?
Mostly terminal installation. Most of it is the back end all. It's all terminal installation. That's ACM.
So this $5,000 figure includes, is the gymnasium, which is not stated here, is that primarily the gymnasium, or does that involve the rest of the facility?
Just the gymnasium.
Okay, but it says the Athens Middle School. It doesn't say the gymnasium. I want to see.
The gymnasium is part of the middle school.
Yes, but I want to see that. I want to be assured that there are a number of people that want to be assured that that's what's going to be done.
I believe Mr. Thompson answered the question.
Okay.
So we understand that the word gymnasium actually is understood.
Maybe put it in there.
You could even put it in, I suppose.
You're not doing anything anywhere else, are you, Roger?
At this point.
Right now, you're not doing
Let's
anything.
put it this way, I'm gonna make that motion and I'll see, get the word gymnasium in there tonight.
I appreciate it.
Roger, there was a concern about a line that goes to the drinking fountain. Is that also?
Larry, do you know whether or not
Any other questions? Mr. Keelan.
I had asked at the last board meeting, this may have been answered by Mr. Becker, but I remember we were having, the state was doing an evaluation in September as to the number of students per teacher and seeing if we comply with the state minimum standards. And we had not yet received the report last board meeting. I wonder if we had received that report yet.
the requirement is 40,000, or no, 40 per thousand, I believe, of regular.
No, this was a specific thing that were coming in and counting the educational service personnel and a couple of few officers.
That's what I'm getting at. Regular teachers, ESP, or educational service personnel. It's 40 per thousand. And I believe we have 139 teachers.
Mr. Kale, excuse me. To answer your question, we've been visited by the person who collects the data, and the rough data has been taken. We have not received back from the state the formal evaluation. There was no concern expressed at the time the gentleman was in from the district office in terms of our class size. But we will have exact figures we should have within the next month.
Okay, this is the one that was done in September.
It's the follow-up of the fiscal management review. They do the fiscal management review first, and then they do the staffing patterns. The staffing patterns was done, collected what, about 3 weeks ago, Alice? But it takes a good while to go through the state and get fed back to us.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to ask for a motion to accept the financial reports as they have been submitted and on display by the treasurer. We have a motion?
I so move.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there any unfinished business to come before the board? Any matters tabled? Hearing none, move on to the Finance Committee. Dr. Vetter.
Thank you, Dean Rudy. I would like to begin the finance report with an announcement that the meeting of the Finance Committee, the next meeting, will be on December 13th at 7 a.m. in the district offices. I am pleased tonight to have, we're very pleased to have as with us this evening Mr. Greg Stipe, who is our special bond counsel with the firm of Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey in Columbus. Greg, come forward. Greg is going to bring to the board's attention some information regarding the permanent financing of the Plain School project. And I think I'll just turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the board, let me say I'm pleased to be here for your evening meeting rather than the finance meeting schedule. Dr. Vetter asked me to come down and give a little background with you with respect to where you are in financing the Plains Elementary School, and then to briefly review the steps that you have to go through establishing your financing. Setting that background, of course, on August 8th, the voters approved the bond for Plains Elementary, and then the board went ahead and authorized an issue of short-term notes so that you could get the $5 million in hand to begin to effectively invest it, make the best use of money, and create the most money possible available to the board. Notes were sold by competitive bid on September 21, delivered shortly thereafter, and they bear an interest rate of 6.25%, which is a very good rate in the market. The notes, however, are short-term financing, and they come due on January 31 of 1990 by the board's design. And that, by design, puts the board in a posture where it needs to consider the steps necessary to sell bonds and permanently finance Plains Elementary School. When the bonds are sold, they will be in the amount of $5 million, just like the notes, and the proceeds from the sale of the bonds will be used to pay off the notes when they come due on January 31. With the notes coming due, the process for selling the bonds has already begun. And it's kind of hard to organize some of these thoughts, but I've identified 5 items. They're sort of the dot points in my mind, the steps that need to be taken, one of which is already well underway. The first item is that when you sell bonds in the bond market, and it's a long-term investment for investors, it's important to provide them with adequate investment information. So we've begun the process of preparing an official statement, a prospectus, regarding the district's financial condition that complies with the disclosure requirements of federal securities laws, and which will be used to effectively market and sell bonds. That's something that we've been working on with your treasurer for some period of time, starting with her completing for us a rather lengthy and tedious questionnaire, and we've incorporated that material into the first draft of the official statement. That first draft has been delivered back and has been distributed to probably some of you board members, but as well to the county auditor's office, who can provide some supplementary information about your recent history in terms of the self-evaluation and tax matters, and undoubtedly to some of the staff, because there are sections of it that address a summary of the educational program for staff, things along those lines, just to provide a complete but relatively brief picture of the district. It runs about 30 pages. There's a number of legal discussions as well. The second point that I have on my outline with respect to preparing for a bond issue that is fairly fundamental these days is that you need to select a bond registrar, a bank who will, for the life of the bond issue, keep a record of who owns all the bonds. This was not required the last time the Athens City School District issued bonds because it was not a requirement of federal tax law and a condition to the interest on the bonds being tax exempt at that time. It became a requirement imposed by federal tax law in 1983, and as a matter of fact, it makes life much easier for your administrative staff because it puts a financial institution that's prepared to keep track of the ownership in a position of keeping those records. It eliminates coupons and clipping coupons and losing coupons and bonds, which is a more frequent occurrence than you might realize. And it complies with federal tax law, and the federal government simply requires an ongoing record of who owns these investments. There are any number of banks in the state of Ohio who are prepared to offer this service. These days, many of them, instead of offering the service on a pay-as-you-go basis, offer it on a one-time upfront fee basis, which some districts have discovered helps them with their budgeting. And I think, in fact, the board or your treasurer has already received some indications of interest from some of these banks. That's a step, a decision, and a selection that needs to be made before you begin to publicize the bond issue, because investors want to see the name of a bank that they generally recognize and know has the capability of keeping these records. And most importantly, if a bondholder wants to sell their bond to someone else, that record has to be changed, and the investor wants the comfort of knowing that that change can happen reasonably promptly so that they can get their investment out, use the money or put it in another investment. A third step in this process that relates quite directly to the preparation of an official statement is the board's decision to seek a rating on its bond issue from the bond rating agencies in New York. Now, customarily, Moody's Investor Services is provided with ratings. Standard & Poor's is also in the business. But in any event, having a good rating on your bond issue will attract investor interest, and the rules of supply and demand, together with a good rating, generally indicate that your interest rate, at least in theory, ought to be improved. Getting the rating is something that should be pursued a few weeks before the bonds are scheduled for sale, particularly in light of the fact that we have holidays coming up. So what we attempt to do is get the official statement in good shape, make it complete, not subject to too many additional changes, and if you desire to seek a rating, send that to the rating agencies, and it provides them with most of the information they need to assess your financial condition and assign a rating to the bond issue. The fourth step, which I'll pause on now and then go into in more detail in a moment, is that the board needs to choose the sale method for the bonds, and to think and make some selections regarding the structure of the bond issue. If I can skip over that for a moment to number 5, and then come back to number 4 and discuss a number of things. The final point I had down is simply that the bonds need to be sold and delivered by January 31, or in the alternative, if the bond market runs away from you because we have another flat Monday as we did more than a year ago, the board always has the alternative of again selling notes and waiting for a good bond market to return. So you are not trapped into the choice of selling bonds, and I don't want to leave you with that implication at this point in time. Returning to point 4 for a moment, I think Dr. Vetter, your superintendent and treasurer are all aware that effective October 31, Ohio adopted a new uniform bond law. The new uniform bond law is a tool available to the board for the sale of its bonds. The new law is that uniform bond law had not been revised since the 1950s, and the new law, in fact, was designed to put into place authority to use more modern financing techniques than had been available to school boards and other subdivisions in the past. 3 of those techniques involve choices that the board needs to make as it thinks about the sale of its bonds. The first choice involves the manner of sale. Historically, in Ohio, up to about 3 years ago, any local subdivision that was selling general obligation debt that was going to have a term of more than 1 year had no choice other than to sell the debt by taking competitive bids on interest rates after advertising in the newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks, and so on and so forth. There were examples where competitive bids weren't taken, and some people considered it particularly important to have a little more flexibility when they sold debt, when you were looking at refunding outstanding debt, selling a new bond issue, getting into the market at the right time, flexibility to make some further choices. So the new Uniform Bond Law offers the board the choice of either selling its bonds by taking competitive bids or interest rates, which means you don't know who's buying them until the day you take the bids. Or in the alternative, you now have a choice of selling the bonds by negotiated sale, as it is called. And I think, in fact, I'm quite certain that your treasurer, I think she's let you know, has been contacted by a number of investment banking firms and banks, all of which are offering their services to you to negotiate the sale of your bonds. The key difference in the negotiating technique is that you select an investment bank or banker to work with you in advance of knowing the interest rate. The selection is usually accomplished by interviewing the firms, and the board collectively decides the firms it's most comfortable with and wishes to work with. And then that firm becomes not only your banker, but in a manner of speaking, your financial advisor, and helps you make some of the other decisions we'll discuss in a moment with respect to structuring the bond issue, as well as advising you down to the day the best time for your bonds to be sold. So that it's perfectly clear to you what my perspective is. I don't have a preference and wouldn't advise the board with respect to a preference on whether you pursue a competitive sale or a negotiated